Hello and welcome. Why Iran's Kharg Island oil hub is still untouched. Right now, in the middle of one of the most intense bombing Iran has faced in decades, there is a tiny coral island in the Persian Gulf that has not been touched. Not one missile, not one airstrike. And here is the part that should make you pause. About 90% of the Iran's oil exports leave the world through that single island. So the obvious questions become almost uncomfortable. If the United States and Israel have already hit thousands of targets across Iran, why is the one target that could cripple the Iranian economy still standing? Because the answer says something uncomfortable. And that is uncomfortable about how global wars actually work. I am Dr. Adeel. I have spent years studying conflicts, energy politics, and the way global power really works behind the headlines. And today, we are going to unpack a question that most television channels and journalists are quietly avoiding. This is In Focus with Dr. Adeel. Let me paint the picture first. Kharg Island is a small island about 5 miles long, 27 miles off the Iranian coast. But the pipelines from Iran's oil field runs straight into this island. From there, giant tankers load crude oil and carry it to the global markets. Every day, somewhere between 1.3 to 1.6 million barrel of oil leave through Kharg. Earlier this year, Iran actually pushed that number close to 3 million barrels per day. That's a huge number. Think about that for a moment. Imagine if 90% of Saudi Arabia's oil passed through a single port, or 90% of American export left through one harbor in the United States. That place would instantly become the most obvious target in a war. Yet during the current US Israel bombing campaign, more than 5,000 targets inside Iran have been hit. Air bases, missile sites, military compounds, but Kharg Island remains untouched. So the real question becomes this: is it a restraint, or is something much bigger stopping Washington and Tel Aviv from pulling that trigger? That is a very serious question. We need to step back in time because this island has become a target before as well. During the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, both sides began attacking oil tankers moving through the Persian Gulf. At one point, more than 400 commercial ships were hit. That's a huge number. Insurance rates for tankers exploded, oil prices surged, and global market panicked at that time. Kharg Island itself was bombed again and again. But something remarkably happened. Iran kept repairing it, even under constant air attacks. Engineers rebuilt pipelines, repaired loading terminals, and restored export capacity again and again. So this island became a symbol of Iran's economic survival. And then the lesson the world learned during that war was very simple. When oil infrastructure in the Gulf becomes a battlefield, the entire global economy feels the shock. That memory still shapes tragic thinking today as well. And that is the lesson we are following in this current war as well. So the energy markets and This is where the story stops being Iran and starts about you. Oil analysts warn that destroying Kharg Island would effectively remove Iran's entire oil export capacity overnight. According to Chatham House, oil prices could jump from around $120 a barrel to nearly $150. That's a big number. Now imagine what that means in real life. Gas prices in Chicago, heating bills in Toronto and London, food transport costs across Europe. So oil shocks travel fast. We saw it in the 1970s when Iraq invaded Iran, and markets right now are already nervous. The Strait of Hormuz has effectively closed. Tanker traffic is stopped because the fear of retaliation. About 3.5 million barrels per day from Iraq are already disrupted. Add Kharg Island to that equation, and the global oil system could enter what analysts call a tailspin. That is a very technical term. So another a few risks we'll talk, but there is another layer to this story that almost never appears on television. Kharg Island sits right next to the most important shipping lane on Earth, and that is right next to Strait of Hormuz. Nearly one-fifth of the world's oil supply, like 20%, passes through this narrow waterway every single day. If Kharg were destroyed, what will happen? Iran would simply sit quietly? No, they are not. Tehran has repeatedly warned that in a full scale conflict, it could block or mine the Strait of Hormuz. So, even a partial disruption, there would be a shake in global energy, and that shake we are feeling right now. Remember something important, and that is when oil tankers stop moving through Hormuz, which is happening now. It does not just affect Iran, it affects Saudi Arabia, it affects equally Kuwait and United States and United Arab Emirates. So it affects global supply chain from Asia to Europe, which means a strike on Kharg could trigger a chain reaction that spreads far beyond Iran. And policymakers in Washington exactly know that if they are going to attack Hague, that is going to hit Europe, America, and the entire world. But here is the twist. The risk is not just economic. There is also a strategic argument that many people miss. Kharg Island is not just infrastructure. It is the financial heartbeat of Iran's economy. Destroying it would not simply weaken the current government. It could cripple any future Iran as well. A blunt point is often raised inside policy discussion is if Kharg were destroyed, any government that comes after the current Iranian leadership, which is there already, would inherit an economy with no functioning export system. In other words, the West would not just be fighting the current regime, but it would be destroying the economic future of the entire country. And that matters politically because if your long term argument is that the Iranian people deserve a better future, destroying their main source of national income makes that argument very difficult to sell. So that is why Washington and Tel Aviv both are avoiding to attack Kharg Island because that is the lifeline of Iran. So there is also another actor quietly watching this situation. And that is very interesting. And that actor is China. Over the past few years, China has become the largest buyer of Iranian oil. Much of that oil leaves through Kharg Island. It often travels through complex shipping networks, sometimes under different flags, sometimes through intermediary ports, but the destination is frequently the same: Chinese refineries. If Kharg Island were destroyed, what will happen? Beijing would suddenly lose a large portion of those energy flows, and that creates geopolitical consequences not for Washington DC only but for Tel Aviv, because energy disruptions involving China do not remain a regional issue. They become global political problems. And that adds another reason why policymakers move carefully around this island. That is very much important to understand. So, the debate inside Washington is that some voices are pushing something far more dramatic, not bombing Hague, but seizing it. Yes, seizing the island. Some American policy voices have suggested a military operation where US forces capture Kharg Island and control Iran's oil export directly. So that is a debate going on in the Pentagon. So the government cannot basically do it directly at the moment. But you have to listen carefully. What is the problem? If the United States controls Iran's Kharg Island, it will still have oil production, but Iran cannot export it, and the US cannot legally sell it either. So the world suddenly faces a strange economic standoff. Oil exists at one place, but it cannot reach to the market. Prices surge, market panics, and political pressure explodes across Western capitals. The very move designed to weaken Tehran could end up pushing consumer in New York, Berlin, and London. So that means you are doing something in Iran, but that is directly going to affect people in the West. So there is also a practical military problem as well. Kharg Island is not undefended. Over the past decades, Iran has heavily fortified the island. Air defense systems, missile batteries, naval patrol units, and Revolutionary Guard facilities. Any attempt to capture or destroy Kharg would not be a simple airstrike. It could trigger a much larger confrontation in the Persian Gulf. On that might involve naval battles, attack on shipping, and regional escalation. Which means the decision to strike Kharg is not just about a single island. It is about whether the war expands into a full regional conflict. So here is the quiet reality, which brings us back to the most important question. Sometimes the most powerful target in a war is the one no one dare to touch. So why has Kharg Island survived while bombs fall across Iran? Because destroying it would not just hurt Iran, it could shock the entire global economy. It could spike energy prices. It could trigger inflation across the West and destabilize markets that are already fragile. And that leaves policymakers facing very uncomfortable choice. Strike the target that could cripple Iran or protect the stability of the global economy. These are two things. And for now, it seems the second option is winning. But wars evolve, and if this conflict escalates further, Kharg Island may not remain off limits forever. So, the biggest takeaway from this talk is very simple. In modern war, the most powerful weapons are not always missiles or fighter jets. Sometimes they are oil markets as well. So, if this video helped you see the conflict from a deeper angle and from a different perspective, subscribe the channel. The next episodes will keep unpacking the global forces shaping these headlines. Thank you very much. This is Dr. Adeel, and you are watching In Focus with Dr. Adeel.